Can we just say the standard of this as a module full stop is so high?
It's so good.
We should have led with that. Why have you let me complain for like
No, it's
20...
fine. We're burying the lead. It's good. It's classic journalism.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's the mid-review turnaround.
Welcome to Adventure Tourism, the podcast where I talk to people in the RPG space about the adventures they love and why they love them. I'm Chris from Loot the Room, and today I'm joined by Quinns. Quinns, who are you?
Who am I? That's an intense question for 10:30 in the morning. My name is Quinton Smith. I am a YouTuber or a content creator. People might know me from my board game reviews on Shut Up and Sit Down. They might know me from my documentaries on People Make Games. They might, if they're super old, know me from my video game journalism that I was doing before I was doing anything on YouTube. And now, if they're cool, they'll know me from Quinn's Quest, which is my new RPG review show, where I'm just playing RPGs, because that's where my heart is now, Chris. I love them. They're good.
We love to hear it. That's so good. We're screaming out for people to actually cover RPGs in a good way rather than regurgitating marketing copy at people. So
it's funny, like people ask me a lot, it's like, oh, so are you going to do actual plays? And it's like, okay, I could review and be quite near the top of the pile for like how much, at least in terms of how many hours I put into each review. Or I could do actual play and be awful. Like, no, I don't know. I think the RPG space has some pretty good actual play performance.
The RPG space has a great actual play space, yeah. It's people, it's having people talk about the stuff in any sort of meaningful way that we're missing, I think.
Yeah, I think the space, I think there's lots of really, this is a crazy thing to say in the year of our Lord 2024, but I think there are lots of really good blogs.
Blogs are on the comeback. Blogs are on the rise.
Blogs are on the comeback. I'm really enjoying on the Quinns Quest Patreon getting the chance to do blogs. But in terms of reviews, and I think like reasonably so, there's just not that many reviewers doing RPG stuff, because I mean, like, I can make money from it because I've got a platform. I'm very privileged, and I've been doing this for a long time because I'm hella old. But for like, if you're just getting started, reviewing RPGs is like, how are you gonna?
It's so hard to do it and make it worth your time.
It takes more time than reviewing unless you're reviewing one shots. It takes tons of time, and then there's very little money in it because often the developers of the games themselves aren't making money. So what chance?
Yeah, and often people are too close to it as well. Like often the same people who are writing the reviews are the same people writing the games, and like you don't want to make it seem like you don't want to be shitting on the competition.
Yeah.
There's this whole like community aspect to it that makes it really difficult.
Yeah, that does make sense to me. The people who are often most equipped to review games are also friends with the people who are games.
Like it'll be hard for me to review an adventure when I'm also releasing adventures.
Right. Yeah. This makes sense. However, me with no aspirations to do any game development at all, I'm here to show up, complain, point at a nice picture of an elf and be like, "That's good. That is 5 stars."
So, what adventure have you picked for us to chat about today?
I have not been running many modules recently, but I tell you what, I did play, and it's an adventure that a lot of Kickstarter backers are eagerly waiting for. I played the introductory official adventure for Mothership, Another Bug Hunt, which is I found it interesting because I do think it's got some strong design, but also it functions as kind of a tutorial for Mothership. But not just a tutorial. It takes you from your tutorial area to hell,
very quickly as well.
Yeah, right. And just about every Mothership adventure ends in hell. But I like that this is a tutorial that does want to dunk you into hell. I think it does a lot of things that I think it capably encapsulates the philosophy of a Mothership module in a way that I found in places interesting and in places surprising. Have you played it, Chris?
I haven't played Another Bug Hunt. I've played a lot of Mothership.
Okay.
But I haven't played Another Bug Hunt. I've read it.
Okay, that's good.
I'm well researched.
You're prepared for this show. Great.
Yeah. Who did you run it? Did you play it?
I ran it. I'm a bit of a forever GM. Nice. And you know what? I had this is sort of, I don't know. I found it fascinating to because I am often running story games.
Yeah.
Or if I'm running action games, then it's something often like Blades in the Dark or Slug Blaster, where I have to invent a lot of stuff on the fly.
Uh-huh.
And the thing about doing this, because I don't do a lot of OSR stuff, I don't do a lot of like I'm looking down at the dungeon and I tell you what's in the dungeon and then you beat the dungeon.
Yeah.
So I couldn't actually believe how relaxing I found.
It's so good, isn't it?
You're just looking down and having a map, and
Yeah.
they're like,
Your players ask you a question like, "What's in this room?" and it's just written on the
it's
page for
written
you.
down. It's nuts. Although the thing that I find really peculiar about Another Bug Hunt, I mean, should we talk a bit about the framework and
If whatever you want to talk about, honestly, we can.
okay, well, for the people listening to this, do you usually do like spoiler flags, or is it just assumed if you're listening to this, it's going to be
No.
spoiled to hell?
It's going to be spoilerific. Yeah. don't
Okay,
worry.
great. If you're thinking of playing Another Bug Hunt, get off this podcast.
Yeah. Or play it and just pretend you didn't listen to the podcast because you're capable of holding two pieces of information in your brain at the same time.
But then, like, you can be the coolest player because you could be like,
Yeah.
I
You've
think
got
I
all
know
the
what's
hacks,
happening.
all the
Yeah,
cheat
exactly.
codes.
Speedrun it. Another Bug Hunt is a module that is a very like knowing riff off the movie Aliens. The players are sort of troubleshooters hired by a corporation to go down to a terraforming colony of about something like 50 people, which has gone dark. It stopped transmitting back to the corporation. So something's gone wrong down there. You were told to go down there, make contact with the terraforming base, get them to reestablish communications with the outside solar system, and turn the terraformer back on. But it turns out, just like in the movie Aliens, the reason the colony has stopped responding is because there's aliens down there.
Yeah, because they're all dead.
They're all, a weirdly high number of them are still alive.
Yeah,
Let me tell you, as a GM who had to do a lot of voices for this module, and I really want to get into talking about how this is a module design. So Sean McCoy, something I didn't realize because Mothership is so vibey. It's so atmospheric, and the layout is so, you're reading the layout of a horror game when you're reading a Mothership module. It's very spooky, very, very, it's absolutely gorgeous. But that made me, a sort of atmospheric story first GM, assume this was going to be a horror game. And playing Another Bug Hunt really teaches you a lot about Sean McCoy and et al.'s design ethos, because in a lot of places it plays like an escape room.
Interesting.
So I read an interview with Sean McCoy in Weird Science magazine, and he talked about how like horror is actually a really difficult thing to get across, and actually what he wants to try and do is provide tension.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of tension in this, but it's funny to me to think that I was dropping my players in a spooky story or a movie, and actually you're sort of dropping them in a spooky obstacle course. And you can make it more or less spooky.
Yeah.
It's also a module that takes place very much in 3 acts, and so the first act is technically 4, but the fourth just isn't written, and it's like make it up yourself.
That's one of the things I really love about it as an intro to Mothership, actually. Yeah, because it's sort of like each module. Did you run all of them, or did you just run the first one?
I ran 3, and then the fourth, which is the unwritten one, and it's like you can style this out yourself. I did not do.
So it seems to me like, obviously I haven't run it, I've only read it, but obviously for those people who haven't looked at it yet, it's got lots of kind of tips throughout for the GM, like little sidebars tell you what to do, and it feels to me like it starts off quite like the first module is quite linear, quite small, has a lot of advice for you, and that advice sort of lets up throughout the book, and then you get to the last scenario and it just sort of goes, you know how to run Mothership now.
Yeah.
You know what these adventures look like. Go and do it. And that looks like the philosophy of it. Did you find that it kind of translated well, or did you struggle with that final scenario?
So let me whip your audience through the 3 acts. Basically, the first act is that they show up to essentially a sort of like a bunker, kind of like little home, and no one's there. It's very, very, very Resident Evil. You're walking from room to room. You're finding evidence of something spooky. There's like exactly 1 monster and 1 trap in about 10 rooms, and it's all sort of like foreshadowing. And it's got some
scary in the same way that Alien is scary, in that you spend an hour with absolutely nothing happening, going, "Where the hell is the alien that's going to kill us?"
But it does have some really neat, like clean design. Like the first room they're probably going to walk into is this like entrance, like wet room where there are some lockers and people take their shoes off and stuff because it's a big rainy planet. And in a locker is a huge, deep gouge that has been carved out of like 4 lockers by something that looks like a big claw. And the reason that's there is like partially, yes, it's a bit spooky, but also it like the room description says, like, in case, like, let your players know in case it isn't obvious that whatever is here that owns this claw could kill one of them in one hit, which is true.
Yeah.
But it's it's mechanical and narrative foreshadowing. It's really nice to be like, hey, ooh, this is spooky. There's an alien, but also, guys, like when you see that alien, don't dick around.
Don't
like,
try and shoot the thing.
Yeah. Yeah, so this first module, you potter around, you find an alien. Then you get to the second building in the terraforming base, and weirdly, my players couldn't believe that there were like 30 people alive in there. And then you get this weird, like, very interesting thing where 3 different kind of leaders of the survivors are like, we each have a different thing. Some of us want to shut down the reactor, some of us want to get some scientific samples, some of us want to go investigate the radio. And it's kind of designed for you to split the party and do 2 adventures concurrently. And it's much more action-packed. It's much more the second half of the Aliens movie, where it's like they're coming out of the walls, there's guns, there's dreads, there's, different colorful situations. It's much faster than the first act. And then the third act takes you in if like the first act is like, tension, the second act is action, the third act is full horror, where the players can find the alien mothership and go inside it and have a bad time.
It's like Aliens, Event Horizon.
Yeah, well, yeah,
maybe not Event Horizon.
Certainly pretty close. Yeah. But then the weird thing is that before they evacuate from the planet, there's the 4th unwritten module is like Act 4. The aliens will attack, and you have to do this like last stand, like in the movie Aliens. But it's not written. It's just like, and here's my problem, Chris. Right, is that I am actually down. I think what I would have liked, you're correct that I like the ethos of, and to be clear, I like this module in general, but this was maybe the biggest problem I had with it, is that I like, here's a tutorial for the players and the GM, and there's another one, and after a couple of sessions, it's like, hey, why don't you tell us what's in the last module? The problem is that last thing they want you to write is an all-out assault from a squillion aliens, and and like that is something that is flat out not covered by Mothership's rules. Like Mothership's rules are rock solid and super granular and detailed for like, ooh, the aliens look like big crabs. Like, oh, there's crabs coming for us. Let's shoot it. And it's like, patang, I know that has bounced off the armor. For the large-scale assault, the book acknowledges that there's nothing in Mothership's rules to do large-scale assaults. Like, you can't play it like a miniatures game. The book says something along the lines of, this combat won't really work unless you abstract it a bit. So, like, if a player's got a really big gun, then why don't you just do 1 combat roll and say they've killed 4 bugs? And it's like, okay, listen, if you had given me a spooky bunker or a cave and been like, this is the 4th and final act, make a cave like we have done for acts 1, 2, and 3, then great. But instead it goes, act 1, 2, and 3, here's a spooky cave, here's a spooky cave, here's a spooky cave. Now, design your own assault. And you're like, wait. You just taught me how to run spooky caves. Why am I designing a war? And also, I'm absolutely ill-equipped to do this.
That's so funny.
That aside, I think it's really, and I just flat out didn't do that. I was like, no, they go into the alien ship and then they leave. That's fine.
Yeah, I'm just reading that. I hadn't taken in fully that last scenario is just sort of like, yeah, there's a storm and there's some ships and do what you want.
Yeah, it's super like, I would have been comfortable designing any of the 3 things that they did. And then the one thing I don't want to design for, not in their rule set, is the thing where they're like, now try it yourself.
It says it's split into, this scenario is organized into 5 obstacles or encounters that players may or may not have to deal with. But it doesn't really give you much for them, does it?
No,
You've got a flood. It's lots of rain.
Yeah. It's the evacuation, the cast. It gives you some vague ideas, but my players did sort of find it peculiar that for the tutorial to what Mothership is, it's like playing through 3 different movies in succession. So
Yeah.
like the first adventure, some of my players found slow, and some of my players found beautifully tense, where they're just going from room to room, very slowly building out a story. And the stakes are very much like, hey, if we can save one life, that'd be pretty good. And they shot and killed one alien in like an incredibly intense thing that really set the stakes for how dangerous an alien was. So they're very
Yeah.
much playing the movie Alien singular. And then when you arrive at the second base, they couldn't believe that there are 30 survivors because it's like, well, hang on, wait. This has completely changed the frame of like what
Yeah.
movie we thought we were in. And then it happens again. And like, I don't hate that as like a tour of everything the Mothership system can do. Of
Uh-huh.
like, we got tension, we got horror, we got action. Um, but I think my players did struggle to find their feet of kind of what
Yeah.
movie they were in.
A bit like a bit of a weird like tonal whiplash
Yeah,
almost
a little
between.
bit.
Yeah.
I mean, the surprise was nice.
Did you play them all in like one session, or did you split them into
No, it
multiple
was
sessions?
3 evenings
Cool.
basically.
Had you run Mothership or played Mothership before this module?
I had not. This was my
You've not.
first time doing any
So,
Mothership.
because my like big interest the last year and a half has been explicitly like introductory modules and how writers introduce players to RPGs, not just
Right.
like players with a lot of RPG experience to specific systems, but also like how do you introduce a game to people who don't have much RPG experience at all.
Mm.
Um, I'm super interested to hear like how this worked for you as an introductory module, like in terms of it introducing how Mothership worked. Did it work, do you think?
I think it introduces the. Yeah, I think it does work to introduce a lot of the mechanics in sequence. I think, like it. Honestly, the thing you mentioned before that I think is so great, and again, it comes down to Mothership's beautiful layout, is the fact that almost every page has a sentence running along the bottom of the page, which is like a tip to do with using the information on that page. And there's already tons of great information on the page. So it's like, a tip on a really useful page anyway. I think it's really, really strong. And I think that first kind of tutorial area of the large sort of housing unit with one alien inside is really great for being structured so that it's like the first thing the players have to do is open a door.
Yeah.
Which is obviously like a comedy of errors if you're playing D&D, but it lets you as the GM encourage players to be like, why don't you suggest to me what you do? There's not a fixed solution. There's not a key card
Uh-huh.
waiting outside. It's like if a player's like, can I hack it? I'm good with electronics. Then you go, yeah. If a
Yeah.
player's like, I've got a crowbar, can I open it? It's like, yeah. Like, why don't you, and then it encourages players to think and examine the scenario they're in. It encourages them, it slowly builds them up to doing fear checks and panic checks. Yeah, I think it onboards them onto the rules really well, which
Mhm.
is why I do find it peculiar that you've got this really nice onboarding followed by a module that ends in being like, just you don't really need the rules though, because we're going to encourage you to design something that is fully outside the rules in any of the rule books.
Just wing it.
Yeah, just wing it, just invent it. And it's like I think that was something that that through my players is like, because it's introducing you to all of Mothership's rules one by one, which is
Yeah.
really nice. They assumed all those rules were important, and I don't think that prepares you for, you know, where the module ultimately goes, which is that OSR thing of like, make rulings not rules and feel it
Mhm.
out. And like my players really felt like they were playing something super crunchy. I mean, certainly they're tracking all of their ammo, like they're tracking
Yeah.
every single point of panic, and I think that, and they don't want to die. So I think, yeah, that puts them in a thing where they believe every rule is important, and then that doesn't prepare them for the idea that but we are just going to invent rules that we think are correct. I don't know. I mean, I'm kind
Yeah.
of describing my entire like feeling about the OSR movement of like, are we doing crunch or are we doing vibes? And is it both? I don't understand.
No, I get that. Especially like when you look at the Mothership like character sheets and they look like a very sort of like trad game character sheet.
Yeah.
It looks like quite a crunchy game. I remember first I've not seen the Mothership 1E character sheets yet, but I remember getting the original zine and opening it up and being like, that's a lot on a
It's
character
got a flow
sheet.
chart. It's got a flow
Yeah,
chart
this is
of
a
your
lot.
science skills.
It's a cool game though.
It's gorgeous. I think also one thing that I've done enough. I don't want to complain about this module. I had a great time. The players had a great time. And what it does really prepare you for is there's a thing in Mothership which is which they've talked about, where players can either survive save the day, or know what's going on. And if you've got a good table of players, maybe they can do 2 of those 3 things. But probably they can only do 1.
Yeah.
And I think another bug hunt really capably demonstrates that, where essentially, because the module is getting worse and worse and more of a horror movie the deeper you go, at some point players will either die or be like, no, let's just leave, guys. It's not what, and that was what happened to me. It basically turns out, the big spoiler at the end is that an android is controlling the bugs. So they're actually kind of maybe a benign species, but the colony's android is controlling them. But when you find him, he's surrounded by, like, one crab is terrifying, and he's surrounded by some, like, countless 50, 100 crabs in the center of the mothership. So the players have found him, and they know they have to kill him, but there is no universe that they kill him, they're getting out alive. So they arrive and talk to him, and then he gives you his whole James Bond villain speech. And he's also the chip in his head is what the players have been told to recover. So both their payday and saving the day is reliant on killing someone they cannot kill, but they can chat to him for a while, and really fun embodying that character as a DM.
I really like the little character descriptions that you get for the NPCs. I think are some of the best character descriptions I've read in a module, in terms of like looking at them on the page and thinking, I know exactly how I will play this character. Like one of them's described as something like the worst manager you've ever had. And the more annoying he is, the better. And I remember reading that and just be like, I know exactly how I would play that. I know who he is from my life that I would embody.
Yeah, no, it's great. I think, like, gosh, I feel like I was reviewing this in terms of, like, within the greater oeuvre of, tutorial modules or mothership modules. But like, can we just say the standard of this as a module, full stop, is so high.
It's so good.
We should have led with that. Why have you let me complain for like
No, it's fine. We're burying the lead. It's good. It's classic journalism.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's the mid turnaround. Yeah. I did find this challenging because, as a GM who does accents, and I get the impression that Sean McCoy does not, because when you get into the part of the module where it's full of survivors, you do have these great descriptions of, like, like you say, there's someone here who's the Marine who's technically in charge, was only promoted because her superior officers were killed. A stoic facade barely contains her manic rage and self-doubt. The Doctor is one of the few personalities who can stand up to that character. Was in love with Olsen, barely masks their grief. Like, and you only need a sentence. Like, that's all you need, and that's certainly all you have time for as a GM. But I do have an axe to grind that it's like, hey, this is your introductory module. Hey, GMs, you know what you're going to have to do at the end of the first session of this is role-play 3 NPCs at the same time. And I found that I actually, because I hate myself, I was like, well, how do I make these 3 NPCs distinct? Okay, I'll make one Russian, one kind of Germanic, and one British, kind of London Cockney. And I was practicing those accents in my house because I felt it was just, I've never read a module that introduces 3 important NPCs that are very distinct and all have different plans. You have to throw at the players at the same time. I found that really challenging. If you don't do voices, it's fine. But if you do voices, strap in, sucker. Okay, but no, the NPCs are great. I think really, maybe my favorite mechanical thing in the whole adventure is, to get back to actually being nice about a nice module. So yeah, when they arrive at this second place where the survivors are, you've got these 3 NPCs who each present them with a mission. And all of those missions are framed of vital importance. The scientist, well, actually, we'll start with the person who just wants to leave. They can't leave because the radio tower's wrecked. And there's a storm rolling in, so your window to leave is really getting small. And so he says, look, there's no, let's just survive. I want to send a team to the radio tower on the other side of this dam to fix it, and then we can leave. Another person says, listen, I sent a team of Marines down into the reactor because it's going to flood, basically. We need to enable the floodgates, otherwise we're going to lose power. And if we lose power, then we lose we lose everything. We lose our lights, we lose, all of our healing equipment. So that's of vital importance. And then the scientist says, look, I'm not saying we shouldn't do those missions, but all of my research on my computer is down in the basement, in the spooky Resident Evil ass basement. And if we go and get that, then I can synthesize ammunition that can get through the alien's armor. And all of these are kind of time dependent because the storm is rolling in and the reactor is flooding. And my players were like, I did have a weird moment in this module where I was phrasing this to my players. My players said we could split up, and they all kind of realized that would be dope, especially in a horror film.
Yeah.
And it's what they ended up doing. But there was a point where someone essentially was the voice of reason of like, hang on, because of X, Y, Z, surely it would make sense for all four of us to do this one. And there was this pregnant pause around the table where my players were like, yeah, but that's not what story we're in.
That's
Like,
not the trope.
that's not the trope. Yeah. And it's, I don't know, like, I think one of the things that makes horror games make sense to me is you really need your players to want bad things to happen to their character.
Yeah.
But then there's the fun push and pull that I do love. Mothership character ships have a high score in the corner, which is just the number of sessions you've survived and has no mechanical impact. And it's like I think it is it's a contradiction, but I do think that Mothership wants players to both have terrible things happen to their characters and survive. And it's a contradiction that functions in the game at play, kind of.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah,
We there's a lot of encouraging characters to run away in Mothership,
yes,
which I think is key to it. Because if you play it like a 5e game where you're like, we are superheroes and this game is balanced around us killing this enemy in 5 rounds,
yeah,
you're gonna have a really bad time with it.
Yeah, there was a really good scene that happened in my game where when they encountered the first like alien, they basically they threw there's some acid they have access to which removes the alien's armor, and they saw the alien. They did like one of them started the game with like a 6-pack of beer, and that was their equipment. But then which was an amazing running joke because she kept drinking a bit, like producing a beer and drinking it, and then someone was like, "Can I have a beer?" And she would go, "Oh, it's my last one." And then in 45 minutes, she would produce another one and start drinking it.
Yeah.
But they cut these beer cans in half to essentially make kind of very fragile acid grenades. And when they've encountered their first alien, they hit it, smacked like right in the middle with a grenade. And so the armor was gone. They kind of ran away. And the alien, because Mothership, to its credit, is always like, no matter how awful the thing you're fighting is, if it takes a wound, it will try and leave.
Yeah.
Which is dark and flavorful, and I love it. But this alien is trying to limp off into the jungle. And we had this great scene where one of the players was like, I'm going to shoot it. I'm going to kill it. And shot it. And the alien kept trying to run away and they kept shooting it. And they were counting the number of bullets they put into it as I was, marking down all the health and doing it all mechanically. But like the increased dread on their faces as they realized they'd got through it. It had no armor anymore. And it took like 3 or 4 rounds of combat. And they're like, oh, interesting. So we would have all died if we'd fought that in real life. And it just made the rest of the adventure better for them, like doing this science experiment of how tough are these things? Oh no.
Pretty tough.
Pretty tough, yeah.
Have your how much experience have your players had with like OSR style play? Because that whole thing of you turning a beer can into an improvised weapon is like, that's like core OSR shit.
They've had no experience, but they cottoned onto it really fast. I think there's a great tip. I don't know, what is it? I don't know if it's in the Mothership book, that when you're playing OSR, the solution isn't necessarily on your character sheet, it's in your head. The thing they did that I was proudest of, which was the most OSR thing, is they were really afraid that something was in this big 2-door garage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they had access to the rollers so they could roll up the garage door, but they were worried. They didn't want it to roll up too much so an alien could get out. They just wanted to roll up a little bit and peek through it. And so they cut a hole in the roll door and stuck a crowbar through the hole near the top, so that if it rolled up more than about 6 inches, the crowbar would stop it from rolling up any further. And
excellent.
I was like, this is great. This is OSR. And then they peeked in the room and it had a big crab in it. And the crab just immediately cut through the door like it was tinfoil. And it's like that. And I can see that scene in a movie. And it's my favorite kind of scene in a horror movie, where it's like, this is a solid plan. And it doesn't work anyway. It's really good. Did you have a bit in the module that stood out to you as something that caught your imagination?
I really love the timeline of events.
Which
is split into what the players know and what they don't know. Because I think a lot of the time in adventures you get given like a timeline or a ton of backstory, and none of it's really usable or relevant. Like it's just almost like a short story for the GM to read while they're prepping it. But this, I don't know. I mean, obviously I haven't run this, so I don't know that all the information in the what they don't know would inform how I ran it. But it felt like it was just enough there for me to make use of it while running it without overloading me with information that I would worry about not being able to remember while I was playing the thing.
I think it didn't overload me with information. There were a couple of times I had to reference it, but I think what it
Uh,
did is it made the place feel very real.
yeah.
Because it's such a good, it's a short timeline, but it meant like, what Chris is referring to as the timeline. It's like 6 months ago, this happened, then 3 months ago, this happened, 2 months ago, this happened. So like, I don't know, it led to consistency in a way I really like. Like when they found the survivors, I knew those
Uh,
survivors had been in a warehouse for 4 weeks, and that paints the description. I think it all becomes more plausible. It let them do some mystery solving of like, why did the android, well, what was the android doing for 3 months? Why is this tracker still on? He's still alive and up in the mountains.
that's
Um,
cool.
I think that what this module of Mothership, but Mothership in general does really well is design the official modules at least is they're designed like escape rooms. There are clear puzzles and solutions, or better plans and worse plans,
Uh,
but they are also real locations, and that's what I don't get when I read a lot of traditional OSR stuff like dungeons. Like I'm excited to run a mouse router campaign. I've played some Can. I like browsing, some of the most beloved adventures for OSE and DCC and stuff. But
uh,
when I read those dungeons, they just feel like escape rooms to me. And Mothership,
yeah,
I think, threads the needle of like, no, this is a real place. It is a real situation, but we have designed some straight up puzzles in it.
it's super interesting that you say feels like escape rooms.
That's I think that's Sean McCoy's line, but it's changed how I see
Yeah,
his. I think this is what I mean. I think Mothership is it's not quite what I thought, because they make it looks they really for marketing they lean on the fact that it's horror. And in
yeah,
terms of the aesthetic and the art design, it's so singular and distinct. But there is a real simplicity to the core of it. Okay, I'll tell you one interesting thing that happened when I was running it is in the alien mothership at the end where things get really bad and all the stakes are really high. And
yeah.
there's all kinds of like, do a climb across this, but if you fail, you fall into acid. And actually, that's how one of my players did a death roll. Was fall.
Excellent.
There's a stupid. Okay, so there's this. They entered. There are 3 routes through the mothership, and the players will only take one of them, but can, if they hit a brick wall, just walk all the way out and try and get in through a different path. Very interesting dungeon design because it forces you to like, if you find something dangerous, then essentially it's not like let's go a different way. It's like, we're 75% of the way through this route, but we don't like this one obstacle. This is skeevy and dangerous.
Yeah.
But if we walk away from it, we have to start with 0% of the way through another of the ways towards where we need to go. Which might, so I don't know, it's an interesting, I've not seen, it's very weird and peculiar dungeon design, which kind of fits the Canadian mothership. Anyway, they get to this one room, which is a corridor full of corrosive mist, and there
Uh,
is no way to get through it. But they are next to a control panel, and the control panel is just this. The book describes it as like a tumorous mouth. It's almost like a pair of. It's. I mean, I'm even describing it as a mouth is too much. So the first thing my players did, it's just a hole basically, this like
yeah.
cancerous looking hole. And the first thing one of my players did was stick the barrel of his sniper rifle into it, and it just chomps and then destroys the rifle and then regurgitates the metal back out. So all my players are like, so the other players around the table are like, this is dangerous. Let's try and work out if we can like climb or deal with this corrosive mist some other way. But that player said something as the players were discussing things. He was like, "I want to. There's a dead body in the room before." He's like, "I want to try and put a finger of the dead body in it." And all the other players are like, "No, that's gross and horrible. I don't want you to do that, and doesn't fit the movie we're in." And then that player got kind of almost annoyed. It wasn't a feel bad moment, but he got close to it,
Uh,
and he thought about what to say, and he said, "Listen, guys, I know we're all acting like this is a story, but it is also a game. And if this is a game, then like I want to try putting other things in this hole."
yeah.
And so the other players were like, and you know what, Chris? That is the solution to the puzzle. The solution to the puzzle is you feed the alien orifice organic matter, and then the
That's
amount of
incredible.
organic matter you give it creates a bridge. And how long the bridge stays up for is however long the hole takes to digest the organic matter. So what actually happened is, and this is more just a comedy ending to the thing, that
Yeah.
player then put its finger in and the bridge raised up out of the mist, and they were like, oh, okay. And they started walking across, but because they'd only put a finger in, the bridge
It immediately
dropped. Yeah,
started to
and then
sink.
that's how one of my players died, was being dropped into acidic fog and not making it out in time.
I bet the player who wanted to put a finger in the hole felt very vindicated.
Well, you know
Though.
what's extra good is that player was the one person who stayed behind next to the hole. So, like he was hole boy. So like he was like, this is the solution. He felt so pleased with himself. That
I
was
bet.
like the best moment for him. And then it was even better that the other players walked across, but his solution didn't quite work. So they all got dunked in acid and one
That's
of them died.
so funny. Oh my god.
Yeah, but my point is that is a big part of Mothership's ethos is that so much of the presentation is it's a horror movie, but under the skin, it's a game.
Yeah.
And I think
totally.
that's the designer's attitude. And I don't think that's how, something like Delta Green is necessarily designed, or a lot of OSR stuff where it's just
I think a lot of I'm doing inverted finger quotes for people listening to this. A lot of horror games take themselves too seriously and forget that the best horror films are also really funny when they need to be.
Yeah. Yeah. I think this is I've thought about this a lot as a GM. How when I was like a teenager or even in my 20s, if I was doing a horror scenario, I would do that thing, which is now very much fallen out of favor of like, nobody can laugh. Like we've all got to build this atmosphere together.
We're
Laughter
going
is
to turn
not.
the lights down really low.
To be fair, I do still turn the lights down like this, and you will not stop me doing that. And you better believe I put on spooky music. But like, but actually, laughter is a counterpart of horror. Like,
Yeah.
if players can't laugh, then it almost takes them out of the moment. But in my experience, if like when players get dunked into acid and one of them dies, they were not laughing then. But
No.
after that, after they've solved the problem, they might have a bit of a giggle. And in releasing that like tension with a laugh, they're then actually ready to be tense again. Like if you force them to be like, it's this deadening experience if you just want to keep tension going for 3 hours.
It's exhausting.
Yeah, and it's not necessarily fun. And if you're not having
No.
fun, you're not going to be like, what can I do in this moment to make this module better? You're just going to be like, this is dull, and I'm getting annoyed.
Yeah. I think some of the best moments of like effective horror at the table are when people are doing stupid things and having a laugh, and then like the really horrific thing happens and kills it.
Yeah, that's good.
They go from having a really good time to having a really bad time in about half a second, and they're suddenly like they're suddenly faced with the reality, like, oh shit, no, we are in a horror film, actually, aren't we?
Yeah,
really
yeah.
awful.
That's great. Like I think I read a tip on those lines, which is like, if they're about to open a door and they think the monster's on the other side, don't put the monster on the other side. Have it so they're walking back to their safe space after opening the door and it's empty, and then the monster just like starts sprinting down the corridor.
Yeah.
How did you, as somebody who played, because obviously, as we've heard on this podcast, I've read, but I haven't run any OSR stuff, but you have. How do you feel that an official Mothership module compares to, like the Squillian OSR dungeon?
I mean, one of the real benefits that Mothership's got going is that Sean has managed to grab like some of the best writers in the industry.
Oh, yeah.
To write Mothership modules.
Yeah.
There are very few people who can kind of stand toe to toe with someone like Luke Gerding. And part of that is just because Luke runs a lot of games, in my experience, a lot of the best modules across the entire history of module design, like even going back to the 70s, are the ones that come out of play. And I think you can look at a module a lot of the time and you can tell who runs a lot of games and who doesn't run a lot of games, because they know what's going to work at the table and what's needed to give the GM the tools to run a good game.
Yeah, I think that's what that really comes through. Like we were talking, it seems like such a small thing if you haven't read the module, but these tips that run along the bottom of each page, I think that relates to what you were just saying, in that throughout the module, there's this storm that is rolling in. The module starts when it's raining, and then only the storm only gets worse, and ultimately becomes the reason they can't leave the planet when things get really bad. Is because, oh no, the storm's at its peak, the dropship will explode if you. But there's just a tip on a page about almost exactly at the halfway mark through the module that says, try to work the storm into all of your descriptions, an ever-present threat. And like, it's just so helpful to have a reminder of like, hey, it's really rainy. Like I actually had rain sound effects running for a lot of, rather than music, just rain, which did. And then you change the rain from like outdoor rain to like rain on a tin roof, if they're inside or outside.
I need to start using sound effects. That's fun.
Oh yeah, I'm starting to run Delta Green tonight, and I really want a soundboard that is only like a bunch of buttons I can press that only are gunshot sounds.
At
Because
varying distances.
oh, that would be great. But like, I mean, primarily they're going to be hearing those guns up close because they'll probably be firing them, right? So
Yeah.
like, but what I want is like, are you going to fire your gun? And then I want that to be 8 times louder than the music I'm playing. And so,
Just a really jarring experience
yeah,
for
just a jump scare, basically, but a jump scare from their own gun, which I think would be great. Anyway, but I just but these tips that are run along the bottom of pages are so well chosen, and I think they
Mhm.
just speak to designers who are playing these games and like really just
Yes.
thinking about what works, what's an obstacle. The module feels very prosaic about like, hey, running a module isn't easy, and
Uh,
and everyone's got to bring their own style to it, and it's. I guess the way I would phrase it is another bug hunt, but also all Mothership modules feel like modules written by GMs for GMs, which
yeah.
shouldn't feel as rare as it does.
No, but it does. I don't know where the point was going. I'll edit that out.
No, I liked you agreeing with me. Can we keep
Yeah,
that?
no, it does feel like that. And like, there's even like, I think when I was reading it through and looking at the tips along the bottom, there's a scenario in the reactor where there's like a big deep
Yeah.
chimney that people can rappel down, and like big weird shapes on the walls. And the tip at the bottom just says something like, use the chimney as a warning of what could happen, but nothing actually has to happen.
Yeah, my that was a great moment actually. The that was so claustrophobic. Yeah, so when my players split up, one of the missions involves this chimney. This is to fix the flood controls in the reactor, basically. So two of it was actually it would oh dude, it was so good. Two of my players had what is they went to turn off the radio, which is just an action sequence and a terrifying one. Like because you have to drive you're put in this like quad bike thing, and you have to drive across the reactor and it driving behind the two Marines who you're going with. It's like, oh, we got these two strapping lads. This is not going to be a problem. And the first thing that happens as you're racing across the dam to get to the radio tower is a crab comes out the water, flips their ATV, and kills them both. And so the players are then like, that is a story beat that is baked into the module. So the players who are
Excellent.
behind them suddenly are like, wait, do we stop driving to check if they're alive? Oh no, they've got the key card to get to the tower. What do we do? So yeah, they have to stop, search the bodies, get the key card, drive off, and then what follows in that mission is relentless. They have to like there are crabs coming out the water. They have to get in the tower. The crabs start ripping open the door. They have to get to the roof. They have to get through another door. The elevator's broken. Super spooky, super dramatic. Those two players that I had didn't joke. They didn't say anything. They did nothing because they were scared.
Yeah.
And they acted like a SWAT team. They happened to pass all of their roles. No one got hurt. They got all the mission objectives. They got back, and basically, it was terrifying. But it was the textbook example of like teamwork and all the dice rolls going your way. And
Yeah.
then and that's why splitting the party was so fucking good because then they had essentially it really felt like they had used every single possible bit of luck at the table. And then we cut to their two friends, and the two friends didn't know this, but to get to the flood controls, you have to put on hazmat suits because you're going into a nuclear reactor.
Uh-huh.
And then you have to abseil into the darkness. And the first thing you see, this is the tip you're referring to, is there are all these crab eggs on the inside of the cooling tower. So they're just descending into like the hive. And having seen the other two players essentially use like I say, every good roll at the table, they're like, we're gonna fucking die. It was so good. And then what actually that did lead, this is the story I wanted to tell from this module,
Uh-huh.
is you're in an irradiated dark monster hive, right? It's
Yeah.
the worst possible scenario. And then it gets worse because as you're going down this staircase, which is like the last room before you get to the nuclear control room, the control,
Yeah.
which is where you're trying to get to, because it's already started flooding. You're going down this like tight staircase, which is really cramped and small. And after you've gone down 4 of the 7 stories you have to go down, you come across the water level because the water has
Yeah.
flooded the reactor, which means you're in these hazmat suits, and now you have to walk downstairs for 3 stories underwater. And I had so much fun with the narration to that. It's like, narrating the tick of the Geiger counter in the suits, the water
Uh-huh.
is more irradiated. And also because it's a hazmat suit, it's got oxygen in it, right? So
Yeah.
you imagine that oxygen lifting you up as you're pulling yourself down into water. But yeah, so then basically what happened with the story I want to tell is that there was a crab in the water. And so the marine player in my group was going in, and then just you're already in hell. And then as you're pulling yourself through this water, you see the crab, and the crab sees you. And then all happening in slow motion, the crab just lashes out. You can't run, you can't move, you can't fire your gun, you're
Uh-huh.
fully underwater. The crab sliced. We did a critical hit roll, and he lost his toes, basically. And then at that point, obviously, all the irradiated water floods into your hazmat suit.
Yeah.
It was the worst thing. Anyway, so his friend, and this was his first time role playing at my table. He'd only ever played D&D before, and he'd certainly never played Mothership or anything OSR.
Yeah.
He's playing the doctor, and he pulls this injured marine player out of the table. And there's still a crab in the water, and it's pitch dark, and the crab's coming towards them. And I asked this newbie role player, "What do you do?" And never in my life as a GM have I seen a player. In real life, this guy's an actor, so he is fully in character, and he stares at my wallpaper into the middle distance. And the room has this really pregnant pause, and this player looks at me and goes, "I don't know." And we all just burst out laughing because it's like, yeah, that is a true and authentic reaction. Welcome to role playing. Yeah, good. Your character has nothing to do. You're just in the dark with a monster.
That's amazing. One of my favorite bits of advice that the book gives to new GMs right at the start is where it says, like, don't try to force the players to experience the story of this module.
Oh, I missed that line somewhere.
It's there's a sidebar that says like freedom to choose on like page 5 or something like that. And it's just a little kind of throwaway comment that says, don't try and force the players to experience the story. The story is only what happens when you play. Nothing more. Like you were saying earlier about how this feels like a real space rather than like a series of encounters. In the way that like some modern adventures are very linear and feel like someone kind of wrote half a novel and then asked the players to finish it for them. This feels like just like, here's a scenario, here's a real space full of real people, and you're going to go into it and see what happens. And I really love hearing people like you tell stories like that, because to me that's a sign of a really successful module.
Yeah, it did lead. I don't disagree with anything you're saying, but it did lead to a peculiar moment where like we say, the module has these 3 main acts: the small building, the bigger terraforming base, and then the alien mothership. But the alien mothership involves them hiking into the mountains after they've just realized what a bad situation this is. And mothership is always like mothership loves to, that line from Ripley in Aliens of like, nuke it from orbit, it's the only way to be sure. Mothership wants to be the game that lets players do that. Like, Mothership thrills in putting you in a horror movie, but then if players have equipment or cybernetics or drugs or something, if they can bypass the story, Mothership wants you to break the horror movie. But it did lead to a weird moment when I was running the module that my players were like, we're just leaving. It's the way to save the most lives. And they were leaving after the second act. And so I had to, as a GM, be like, well, hang on. I don't think my players want to leave without. Like, they're like, we're not going to hike into the mountains after this android. We're going to die. And sure enough, when they did do that, they did die. Or at least one of them did. But they wanted to leave. And I, as a GM, were put into a weird spot of being like, I wasn't quick on my feet enough. If I was quick on my feet, I would have said, okay, the dropship comes, and abs the dropship is leaving. And we did this scene later. You see this alien mothership in the mountains. And then the players can be like, oh, okay, there's more content. Maybe we do want to go see it. But I wasn't quick enough. And what I ended up saying to my players was like, okay, guys, just so you know, because I don't know what to do in this moment. You are choosing to leave now, but there is an entire final third of the module that you haven't seen.
I think that's a real tension in adventure design a lot of the times, especially if you're playing them as like a one-shot rather than as part of a campaign, because smart characters do look at a situation and say, absolutely not.
Yeah, no, right. That's what I would do.
We're not going that way. Yeah. But then as a player, you're kind of like, well, I'm here to play a game, so I'm going to go and play the game.
Yeah.
And I think sometimes you do need to lean into like, we're going to be the people in the horror movie who run towards the monster instead of running away from the monster.
Yeah.
But then when you're playing it in a campaign, like a long-term campaign, I think you have a bit more leeway to say, we're not going towards that, and to leave it alone, because then as a GM, you can have that have repercussions in the future.
Yes. Or that, who's to say they don't get a ship and then go back to that,
Yeah.
crash mothership, weeks down the line.
Yeah, it's a real, so much, especially of horror games, so much of it relies on player buy-in and players saying we are going to put ourselves in these horrible situations even when we know we shouldn't.
Yeah, but it's stickier than that, because it's not just, are we going to go into the horrible situation? Like, because that's just a question of like, are we going to do something dangerous or safe? I'm talking about not essentially opting out of a big chunk of the adventure.
Yeah.
And that then becomes a harder question of like, oh, even if I want to play safe, like, actually the big tip that I would give people who are starting Mothership is and the biggest mistake of all I made playing this module, which I don't think it warns you about, and I don't think this is its fault, but I do want to flag for your audience, is when I sat down to play this, I said to my players, okay, well, we're going to do this module of Mothership, and if we like it at the end, we can turn it into a campaign. Right? What could be more sensible? Horrible idea. Terrible idea. You know why? Because because you run a one-shot differently to how you run a campaign.
Definitely.
And my players did not, did my players want to survive? Did they care about, I don't know, like they found there's a rocket launcher in this adventure with one rocket. If you're playing a campaign, you want to keep it safe. If you're playing a one-shot, you want to fire it immediately.
You want to see the rocket go off.
Yeah, come on. Like, I'm going to not fire the rocket in a one-shot. But I think that influenced not just the rocket launcher, but everything. It influenced how much character development they wanted to do. Like, if we were playing like one of the big pieces of feedback I got when we finished the module, my players being like, we didn't really know who each other were, like, as characters. And that meant we couldn't really role play, and like I wasn't embedded in my character. But that's because they were playing it for a one shot.
Yeah.
Whereas and I think honestly, what I should have done is had faith in Mothership. Like, I really want to run this. I want to run at least a few modules. I want to run a Pound of Flesh. I want to run Gradient Descent. I want to run Roadworks. I don't know if you've read that one.
I've not read Roadworks. No.
It's in the I think Hull Breach. The big anthology.
Oh yeah.
There's one adventure in that. If you have that.
I do.
Oh, great. Give Roadworks a read, and then send me a Twitter message, because it's wild and very fun. So, but I think I should have just had faith and been like, I want to run a bunch of Mothership modules. I need to let my players know this is a campaign. I need to do a session 0. I need to develop their characters more.
Yeah.
I think being caught between not knowing if another bug hunt was a one shot or a campaign starter was an error.
Oh, that's interesting. That feels like a really organic place to stop.
I mean, we're talking about endings, right? We're talking about
endings, yeah. How do you end the podcast is the perennial question, isn't it?
You let your guest push. It sounds like I'm
No, please.
But hey everybody, have you enjoyed listening to me talk about role-playing games? If you have, then I have a new YouTube channel. It's called Quinns Quest. I do reviews. That's it. Actually, that's not true. If you subscribe to the Patreon, I do blogs, and there's designer interviews and videos on GMing tips. But I would really like to hopefully see a few over there. But if not, hey, I've had a great time on your show, Chris.
Thank you very much for coming on. I appreciate it a lot. For people listening, there will be links to Quinn's YouTube channel, the new channel, and his Patreon, as well as to where you can buy another bug hunt in the show notes. This podcast doesn't have any sponsors, doesn't have any advertisers. It's just me. If you want to throw some money into my Ko-fi, I'm very welcoming of that. If you also want to go sign up to my Patreon, there's a link to that in the show notes. You will get episodes a week before anybody else, and some little outtakes and behind the scenes things, as well as lots of my writing about the RPG industry and games and things like that. Thank you very much for listening.